this is actually your first time here, so I kind of want to get into your story. Now, you were born in the South Bronx, but you grew up in Harlem.
Yes, sir.
So, what was Harlem like? We're talking about the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Yep.
Describe that to me at the time.
Harlem was, I remember there's two films that were done. So for anyone who ever is wondering what it was like when I was growing up, there's one called Cross 110th Street, that movie, which actually was filmed mostly on the East Side where we grew up. Well, there's a few. New Jack City would be one that gives you a sense of what Harlem was like, especially in the crack era of the 80s, where people like Alpo were a legend. I mean, the kid was like 15 years old, but everybody knew of Alpo and what he was doing in the crack game. People like Nicky Barnes was still a legend. Heroin was still around. There were dope fiends on the corner of 110th and Lexington having to go to school. In fact, the building in New Jack City, Graham Court, which was the location, the actual name of the real building, and that was where they had the factory. My father used to be an X-ray tech in a clinic in the bottom of that building, which serviced a lot of people in the neighborhood, but a lot of dope fiends. And I remember being a kid, looking up at these people with swollen arms and ankles from shooting up and nodding out, and he had to care for these people when Harlem was burnt out and cracked out in the 70s. But he used to always talk about the 20-year plan for Harlem. And we grew up on the East Side, 1199 Plaza, which is now called East River Landing. So Damon Dash was my neighbor. He lived in the same building. Black Rob lived down the block. Jim Jones was a building next door. Watching cats hustle, starting to hustle. People like Damon, when he was a teenager, and I was the older dude, what the fuck are you doing? And he had a plan that turned into Rockefeller Records, but I remember people starting to make certain kind of choices. We were kept away from those choices personally.
Well, I interviewed Azie Faison.
Rich gets killed.
Yes, sir. Poe kills Rich. Poe, I believe, walk away with the birds. You feel me?
At the time, how much was a brick of cocaine going for?
At that time, I believe the prices had went up to about 25 around that time.
Okay, so let's just do some math here. 30 bricks times 25,000. $750,000.
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about maybe $1.5 million, $2 million
Yes, sir.
worth of cocaine in terms of the street value.
Yes, sir.
Did you know these guys at all, or you just saw them around the neighborhood?
I mean, Alpo was actually from the east side of Harlem, but ran his business on the west side. So I didn't actually, you crossed paths, but Alpo was more like a dude that people knew of. I can't say that I ran with him, but I certainly knew girls that knew him. And the thing about growing up on the east side of Harlem, Central Harlem, where all, they used to call it bubbling, or the hustlers. That's what they call it. This kid hustles or this kid's bubbling, or scrambling rather, is what they used to call it back in the day. So all the cute girls from the neighborhood weren't trying to mess with you if you weren't pushing a Beam or a Benz back then, and we were 15, 16 years old. We were kids. But, you think you're old and grown. But things, it was all right there. The birth of hip hop. Obviously it's from the Bronx, but growing up before, songs were on record, before they were on 12 inches, when it was all about the cassettes and people duping the cassettes and passing them around and, going to the parties, either the block parties or Harlem World, when Harlem World was a club on 116th Street or a rooftop on 145th Street, that kind of thing. So yeah, I was around doing all that.
Well, here you are, a young kid, really at the epicenter of the crack era. and you're seeing all these millionaires, these young millionaires around you. You personally, did you get mixed up in any of that,
Nah,
or did your parents kind
My
of keep
father-
you away?
My father was an old school hustler. My father came up when the hustle was pimping. So he was a street dude. He came to New York when he was 15 from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, to be a musician, a jazz musician. So he came up through that era. He saw, what happened with the dope game, but he kept us away from that. Like, he became Muslim in the late 50s, and he was determined to keep his kids out of the streets and not get caught up in that. But it was around us. I mean, I used to work for hustlers, like old school Harlem hustlers. These dudes that owned a place called Cards and Stuff. So they had 2 locations. One up in Esplanade Gardens, up on like 7th Avenue, like 135th, just north of that actually, maybe 140 something. And then they had one on 108th and 1st where we lived. And I used to deliver newspapers. I had a paper route from 8 years old to 16. That was my hustle, like newspapers, but working for those old school, like Nicky Barnes kind of cats that were number runners, and they sold dope too, but they didn't put it in front of us, but they were old school, like for real.
Yeah, I mean, I also interviewed Pee Wee Kirkland.
When you getting that kind of money, especially me, I was like, they called me the Bank of Harlem. So, and nobody had a problem in Harlem that they didn't come to me about. I even had guys work for me that was their job, to make sure. So every business people brought to me, I would give them money for the business, and I would make 50% profit. And the same thing I was doing, but I wasn't doing it in Harlem, other places in New York, the boutiques on 60th Street, a lot of them, but I was doing that through other people. So I was like Sherlocking money, but the only difference is they paid interest. But in Harlem, never paid no interest, And even when I did favors where it wasn't business, they never had to pay me back. So I don't know if you can count that kind of money, you know what I mean?
The amount of money that was running through his operation was just monumental.
Yeah.